I am going to talk about allocation of C-band frequencies in different parts of the world for 5G networks. This chart gives you an idea. It's a map where service providers are already investing in 5G networks. You can see that there are practically no uncolored areas, only a few parts of Africa. This is telling us that 5G is the reality of today. It's not a thing of tomorrow. Where do those service providers invest? What kind of frequency bands? Most of them, about 50%, invest in N78 and N77 bands. That is 3300 to 4200 megahertz frequencies, which we use in satellite communications, and we call that C-band. There are about 200 devices out there available in the market that support this band. About 100 of them are smartphones. Let us take a look at C-band situation in the global markets. According to most analysts, C-band accounts for 40% of all transponders offered in the market, with 70% saturation. We're talking about 2,500 transponders that are used, different transponders, and that accounts for 20% of all revenues globally. In absolute numbers, we're talking about $2.6 billion in revenues. The applications are quite standard. We're talking about TV and corporate networks. Analysts say that C-band is going to continue to play an important role in fixed communications in next decade. By the end of this decade, by 2029, analysts say that there will be about 1,500 transponders in operation globally. The revenue from this band is going to be smaller, but C-band will continue to play a very important role. Now, to the subject of my presentation, let us look at different regions and see what's happening with frequencies allocation. First, let's look at according to ITU, that is region 1. Everything has been done, everything has been allocated in Europe. They're not using C-band for inter-regional communications, mostly K and KU. So these frequencies have been allocated for 5G in most of the countries. In Germany and Great Britain, the bigger countries, they have already had tenders. In France, they're doing it right now. This is the data that we collected after reviewing several surveys where GSA members were questioned. Next, Middle East and Africa. It's also region 1 according to ITU. Oil-rich companies in the Persian Gulf, they have not been using C-band because they always have nice weather. They have allocated these frequencies to 5G, and 5G networks are already operational in Qatar. We have already seen some interference from 5G base stations that belong to one of our customers. Other parts of the world, you can see that they're still in the phase of consultations. Next, we go over to region 2, Americas, Northern, Southern, and Central America. We focus on Brazil and on the United States, the biggest countries. In Brazil, they are still in the planning phase. They have some regions with a lot of rain around the Amazon River, where they use satellite communications for many social needs. So they will allocate the lower part of the spectrum, but they are working on it. The United States presents an interesting picture. The regulator is offering compensation to service providers for giving up C-band frequencies, but I'm going to talk about that more separately. In the United States, they look at 3.7 to 4.2 megahertz. Other frequencies are allocated for civilian broadband, and they do not issue licenses for that range. Now, we are looking at the most interesting situation in Region 3, that is Southeast Asia and Oceania. Southeast Asia is on the one side, they are pioneers in implementation of 5G. They are not using these frequencies for satellite communications. They have a number of 5G networks already deployed. On the other end of the spectrum, we find countries that actively use C-band because they have a lot of rains, and they use it for TV, they use it for broadband access and for corporate networks. Interestingly, this region will be very interesting in the future because of the way they use their frequencies. Indonesia presents a very interesting picture. They use C-band a lot because they are in the worst situation in terms of rain. They have several telecom holdings that own licenses for satellite communications and wireless communications. India is also an interesting picture. You can see that the lower part of the C-band can be easily allocated. In China, Huawei is the leader in 5G technologies. The lower part, 3.3 to 3.6, have been allocated, and they do not plan to touch upon the upper part of this band because Chinese satellite service provider is actively using it for broadcasting TV using broad beams. Now, let us look at the costs. This is a chart that shows you countries that have already allocated C-band for 5G. In the right-hand side of this chart, you can take a look at the costs, the prices that mobile service providers had to pay. The prices are per 1 megahertz in relation to the number of population in the area. So that is dollar per megahertz per person. To get the overall price, you have to multiply 1 megahertz price by volume by the number of people living in the area. In conclusion, I would like to talk about the approach which they used in the United States. Their experience is quite interesting for us because a lot of their C-band is used for television, for cable operators. They decided to offer incentives, to offer compensation for those service providers that would be willing to go over to the upper part of the C-band. They have a lot of transponders. They have over 2,000 TV channels that are supported by C-band, and over 100 million households are covered by this service. Satellite service providers have serious lobby. They suggested to the regulator that some of the costs associated with release of the lower part of this band would be compensated. Those operators would be paid to switch to the upper part of the band. FCC has requested an independent audit of this situation. The auditors, the experts did an assessment, and they evaluated the costs at $5.2 billion. That is building and launch of new satellites, consolidation of teleports, installation of frequency filters, repointing antennas, and concessions for operators. So the regulator, the FCC, decided to do this. They want to release the lower part of the segment. They are going to take the cost of $5.2 billion. The auction revenues are expected to reach $10.5 billion. That is $0.5 per megahertz per person. FCC decided that they would provide 9.7 billion to satellite operators, but that does not apply to all satellite operators, but only to those that have the largest number of networks in the United States. Those are the 5 service providers: Intelsat, SES, Eutelsat, Telesat, and Star One. They are going to get a share of this pie with a condition. By December 25, all these service providers have to release 300 megahertz. If they release 120 megahertz by December of 21 and upper by the next year, they will be eligible for this money. The money is good. If you compare it to the real costs, you can check out this chart. This is the SES cost assessment. These are costs associated with transition to the upper part of the spectrum. 1.5 billion, and SES is going to get about 4, which is quite a nice amount on top of their revenues. They really are making up for the losses associated with the 300 megahertz that they are handing over to FCC. That's the information as of September 2020.